The blistering Nevada sun hung like a curse in the cloudless sky as Katherine Ellis stumbled from the stagecoach. Her face streaked with dust and fatigue after 3 days of arduous travel. Silver Creek wasn't much to look at, a single muddy street lined with weathered buildings, the smell of horses and whiskey hanging in the air, but it was supposed to be her sanctuary, at least for the night. "Last stop, madam," the driver called, already unloading her trunk. "Silver Creek." Katherine clutched her reticule tighter, the meager contents inside representing all she had left in the world. The year was 1876, and at 22, she'd never imagined finding herself alone in a frontier town with night approaching rapidly. The town loomed before her, both a threat and a promise. Somewhere in this dusty settlement, she would find shelter before continuing her journey to California, where her cousin had offered her a position as a schoolteacher. "Thank you," she said, paying the driver the last of her readily available money. The rest was sewn carefully into the hem of her dress, enough to start a new life, if she was careful. The Silver Spur Inn stood at the far end of the main street, its faded sign creaking in the warm evening breeze. Katherine lifted her skirts above the mud and made her way toward it, ignoring the curious stares from men lounging outside the saloon across the street. Her plain blue traveling dress was wrinkled from the journey, but still respectable. She'd left Philadelphia in a rush, but she hadn't left her dignity behind. The innkeeper, a portly man with greasy hair and suspicious eyes, looked her up and down as she entered the dim lobby. "I'd like a room for the night, please," she said, trying to sound confident despite her exhaustion. "Traveling alone?" he asked, making no move toward the row of keys behind him. "Yes, I'm on my way to San Francisco." She reached into her reticule, ready to pay. The innkeeper leaned forward, his gaze hardening. "Don't take unaccompanied women, bad for business." "Excuse me." Katherine blinked in disbelief. "No husband, no room." He gestured toward the saloon across the street. "The girls upstairs might have space for you if you're looking for work." Katherine felt her cheeks burn with indignation and humiliation. "I am a schoolteacher, sir, not a—" "I simply need a room for the night. Don't care if you're the Queen of England. No husband, no father, no brother, no room." He turned away, making it clear the conversation was over. Katherine stood frozen, acutely aware of the fading daylight outside. The stagecoach was gone. She had nowhere to go, no one to appeal to. She was a stranger in a town that clearly didn't welcome respectable women traveling alone. "Perhaps there's another establishment," she asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "This is it, miss. Silver Creek ain't exactly San Francisco." He didn't even look up from the ledger he was pretending to study. Fighting back tears, Katherine picked up her small valise and walked outside, leaving her trunk on the inn's porch. She wouldn't give the awful man the satisfaction of seeing her cry. But as she stood in the middle of the street, the reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave. Night was falling. She was alone in a frontier town with nowhere to sleep. The saloon across the street had grown rowdier as evening descended. Raucous laughter spilled from its swinging doors, and Katherine shuddered at the thought of seeking shelter there. A pair of drunken miners staggered past, eyeing her with interest that made her skin crawl. "You lost, miss," one called. Katherine turned away, walking briskly toward the general store she'd passed earlier. Perhaps the shopkeeper would know of another option, but the store's windows were dark, closed for the night. As panic began to rise in her throat, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her turn. A tall man on a chestnut gelding rode slowly down the street, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He pulled his horse to a stop nearby, and Katherine instinctively stepped back. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat. His voice was deep but gentle. "You look like you might be in some trouble." In the fading light, she could make out a strong, weathered face beneath the hat brim. He wasn't young, perhaps in his early 30s, but his eyes were kind, without the predatory gleam she'd seen in the miners. "I'm fine, thank you," she answered automatically, years of proper upbringing preventing her from confessing her dire situation to a stranger. He dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life on horseback. "Forgive me for contradicting a lady, but you don't look fine." He gestured toward her valise. "The stagecoach left an hour ago, and you're standing in the middle of the street looking like you've lost your best friend." Something about his straightforward manner broke through Catherine's reserve. "The innkeeper refused me a room because I'm traveling alone," she admitted, embarrassment coloring her words. "Abel Morgan," the cowboy shook his head, "man's a fool, always has been. Nevertheless, he's left me without lodging for the night." The man looked thoughtful, then removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with a touch of gray at the temples. "I'm Lucas Harrington," he said. "I've got a homestead about 3 miles outside town. It's not much, but it's clean and safe." He met her eyes directly. "My home is yours, if you need a place to stay tonight." Katherine stared at him, weighing the propriety of accepting such an offer against the reality of her situation. Night had fallen completely now, and the only other options were the street or the saloon. "I couldn't possibly impose," she began. "It's no imposition," Lucas said. "I've got a spare room my sister uses when she visits from Reno. You'd be perfectly safe." He smiled slightly. "I was raised by a woman who'd tan my hide from here to Sunday if I let a lady spend the night in the street when I had a roof to offer." His forthright manner and the mention of his sister eased some of Catherine's anxiety. Still, she hesitated. "Look," he said, seeming to understand her reluctance. "I know you've got no reason to trust me. How about this Mrs. Whitaker at the bakery knows me well? She's closed up for the night, but her house is just behind the shop. We could stop there first and you can ask her about me." The suggestion helped Katherine make up her mind. A man with ill intentions wouldn't invite scrutiny from a respectable townswoman. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington. I would appreciate that very much." Lucas nodded. "Let me get your trunk from the inn. The innkeeper, don't worry about Morgan. He and I understand each other." Katherine watched as Lucas strode toward the silver spur. Through the window, she could see the innkeeper's face change when he spotted the cowboy. There was a brief, tense conversation before Lucas emerged with her trunk balanced easily on one shoulder. "Ready?" he asked, securing the trunk to his horse. The visit to Mrs. Whitaker's small house behind the bakery was brief but reassuring. The plump, gray-haired woman greeted Lucas like an old friend and, after hearing the situation, gave Katherine a warm smile. "Mr. Harrington is one of the finest men in these parts, dear. You'll be perfectly safe with him. Far safer than at that flea-bitten inn, if you ask me." With that endorsement, Katherine allowed Lucas to help her onto his horse. He walked alongside, leading the animal through the darkened streets and then out onto the moonlit road beyond the town. "I hope you don't mind the ride," he said. "It's not far." "I'm grateful for your kindness," Katherine replied, feeling strangely calm despite the unprecedented situation. "May I ask why you were in town so late?" "Had business at the assay office. I do some prospecting in the winter months when the cattle don't need as much tending." His voice was steady in the darkness. "What brings you to Silver Creek, miss?" "Ellis, Katherine Ellis." She adjusted her position on the saddle. "I'm passing through on my way to San Francisco. My cousin has arranged a teaching position for me there." "Long way from home, Philadelphia." Lucas whistled softly. "That is a journey. Family back east." Katherine's throat tightened. "Not anymore. My parents died last year, influenza. The house had to be sold to pay my father's debts." She hadn't meant to reveal so much, but something about the vast, starlit sky and this stranger's kindness loosened her tongue. "I'm sorry to hear that," Lucas said quietly. Losing family leaves a hole nothing can fill. They fell into companionable silence as the road wound through sage-scented hills. Finally, a cluster of buildings appeared in the moonlight, a modest but well-maintained ranch house with a barn and corral beside it. "It's not much," Lucas said as he helped her dismount, "but it's home." "It's lovely," Katherine replied and meant it. After the harshness of her journey, the small homestead with its neat porch and glowing window seemed like a haven. Inside, the house was simple but comfortable. A main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen beyond, and two doors that presumably led to bedrooms. Books lined one wall, a surprising sight that immediately raised her estimation of her host. "My sister's room is through there," Lucas said, indicating one of the doors. "Let me light the lamp for you. Are you hungry? I've got stew I can heat up." Katherine suddenly realized she hadn't eaten since a hasty breakfast on the stagecoach. "That would be wonderful, thank you." While Lucas busied himself at the stove, Katherine took in more details of the home. Despite being a bachelor's residence, it was clean and orderly. A framed sketch of a woman with Lucas's eyes hung near the fireplace, his mother, perhaps. Through the window, she could see stars spangling the vast Nevada sky, more stars than she'd ever seen in Philadelphia. "It's so peaceful here," she said. Lucas glanced up from the stove. "Most nights. Sometimes the coyotes get to singing, but you get used to it." He ladled stew into two bowls and placed them on a small table. "It's not fancy cooking, but it's filling." The meal was indeed simple, but delicious beef stew with vegetables from what she assumed was his own garden. Lucas asked thoughtful questions about her teaching experience and her plans for California, carefully avoiding more painful topics. "The stage comes through again in 2 days," he said as they finished eating. "You're welcome to stay until then." "You've already been far too kind," Katherine protested. "It's no trouble. I'll be working the north pasture tomorrow, so you'll have the place to yourself most of the day." He stood collecting their bowls. "The pump is out back if you want to wash up. I'll bring water for the basin in your room." Later, as Katherine settled into the small but comfortable bedroom, she felt an unexpected sense of peace. The bed was covered with a handmade quilt, and a pressed wildflower hung in a frame on the wall, feminine touches that spoke of his sister's visits. It was strange to think that this morning she'd been on the stagecoach, worried about finding lodging for a single night, and now she was in the home of a man she'd just met, feeling safer than she had in months. Morning brought golden light streaming through the small window. Katherine rose early, accustomed to making herself useful. By the time Lucas emerged from his room, she had coffee brewing and had found eggs to scramble. "You didn't need to do that," he said, looking surprised. "It's the least I can do to thank you," she replied. "Do you usually cook for yourself?" "Not like this." He accepted a plate with appreciation. "Usually just coffee and whatever's quickest before heading out." After breakfast, Lucas showed her where everything was before preparing to leave for the day's work. "I should be back by sundown," he said, settling his hat on his head. "Make yourself at home. There are books if you get bored." Left alone, Katherine explored the small house more thoroughly. The bookshelves revealed a man of unexpected depth: history, philosophy, even poetry. A desk in the corner held papers, and a ledger with neat columns of figures. This was no uneducated cowhand, but a man who managed his affairs with intelligence and care. Outside, the landscape stretched to distant mountains, wild and beautiful in a way the crowded streets of Philadelphia had never been. Katherine sat on the porch for a while, simply absorbing the vastness, before deciding to make herself useful by preparing a proper meal for Lucas's return. The garden behind the house yielded vegetables, and she found flour and other staples in the kitchen. By late afternoon, bread was baking, and she had a stew simmering that would be ready when he returned. The sun was setting when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Lucas looked tired but smiled when he saw the smoke from the chimney. "Something smells mighty good," he said as he entered, removing his hat and dusty coat. "I hope you don't mind," Katherine said, suddenly uncertain. "I wanted to repay your hospitality." "Mind." He laughed, a warm sound that seemed to fill the small house. "This might be the best homecoming I've had in years." They ate at the small table, and Katherine found herself telling Lucas stories of her life in Philadelphia, her father's bookshop, where she'd helped since childhood, her brief teaching experience at a girls' school, her dreams of adventure that had never extended quite as far as being stranded in a Nevada town. "Why teaching?" Lucas asked, genuinely interested. I love watching children discover the world, she answered. That moment when they understand something for the first time, it's like watching a flower bloom. Lucas nodded. My mother was a teacher before she married my father. She taught me and my sister at home until we were old enough for the school in town. His expression grew distant. She always said education was the one thing no one could take from you. A wise woman. She was, he hesitated. She died when I was 16. My father followed 3 years later. My sister married and moved to Reno, and I've been here ever since. You've been alone all this time? Katherine asked. Lucas shrugged. Not really alone. There's neighbors within riding distance, friends in town, but yes, I suppose I have been. He looked at her curiously. You understand that kind of loneliness, I think. Their eyes met across the table, and Katherine felt something shift between them, a recognition of kindred spirits beneath their different backgrounds. The next day followed a similar pattern. Lucas left after breakfast, and Katherine busied herself around the house, finding small ways to make herself useful without overstepping. She darned a shirt she found in a mending basket, organized the kitchen shelves, and even ventured out to the garden to weed the vegetables. In the afternoon, a woman rode up to the house, a neighbor, Mrs. Bennett, who'd come to deliver mail that had arrived for Lucas in town. So you're the young lady everyone's talking about, she said, studying Katherine with frank interest. Everyone? Katherine asked, dismayed. Small towns, Mrs. Bennett said with a shrug. Word travels fast, but don't worry, most folks are saying good things. About time Lucas Harrington had a woman's touch around the place. Oh, it's not like that, Katherine protested. I'm just passing through, Mrs. Bennett smiled knowingly. That's how it starts, dear. My Henry was just passing through too, 30 years ago. She looked around the property. Lucas is a good man, one of the best. He deserves someone to come home to. After the neighbor left, Katherine found herself thinking about the woman's words. The idea of staying in this wild, beautiful place instead of continuing to San Francisco was absurd. She barely knew Lucas Harrington. Yet something about the rhythms of this simple life appealed to her in a way she hadn't expected. When Lucas returned that evening, they sat on the porch after dinner, watching as stars appeared in the deepening blue sky. I ran into John Taylor in the North Pasture today, Lucas said. He mentioned the school in Red Rock is looking for a teacher for the fall term. Red Rock, next town over. About 10 miles from here. He kept his eyes on the distant hills. It's a growing place. They've even got a real schoolhouse, not just the back room of the church. Katherine's heart quickened. Are you suggesting I apply? Lucas turned to her then, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. I'm suggesting that maybe San Francisco isn't the only place that needs good teachers. We barely know each other, she said softly. I know enough, he replied. I know you're brave enough to travel across the country alone. I know you're kind enough to make bread for a stranger. I know you see beauty in this harsh land that many miss. He paused. And I know that in 2 days I've grown more used to your presence than I thought possible. Katherine looked out at the vast landscape, thinking about the path that had brought her here, the loss of her parents, the journey west, the cruel innkeeper who denied her a room. The stagecoach leaves tomorrow, she said. I know, if I stayed. She hesitated. If I applied for the teaching position, where would I live until then? I couldn't impose on you indefinitely. Mrs. Whittaker has rooms to let above the bakery, Lucas said. But, he took a deep breath. My offer stands. My home is yours, Katherine, for as long as you want it. The directness of his words made her pulse race. People would talk. People always talk. Doesn't make it our concern, he smiled slightly. Of course, there's a way to silence the gossips if you're worried about propriety. Lucas Harrington, are you proposing marriage to a woman you've known for 2 days? Katherine couldn't hide her astonishment. Not exactly. His smile widened. I'm proposing courtship. Marriage can wait until we know each other better. I just wanted you to know that's where my mind is heading. The honesty of his declaration touched something deep in Katherine's heart. After years of careful propriety in Philadelphia, there was something refreshing about his straightforward approach. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Say you'll stay. At least long enough to see if Redrock needs a teacher as badly as I think they do. He reached out, hesitantly covering her hand with his. I know it's sudden, I know you had other plans, but sometimes life takes unexpected turns. The warmth of his hand on hers felt right in a way Katherine couldn't explain. Yes, she said finally. I'll stay. The next week passed in a blur. Lucas accompanied Katherine to Redrock, where the town council was indeed eager to hire a qualified teacher. The position wouldn't start until September, 2 months away, but they offered an advance on her salary to help her get settled. Mrs. Whittaker did indeed have rooms to let above the bakery, but Katherine found herself reluctant to leave the ranch. There was something about waking up to the vast sky, helping Lucas with small chores around the property, and sharing quiet evenings that filled an emptiness she hadn't fully acknowledged before. You can stay here, Lucas offered. We'll be proper about it. I'll sleep in the barn if that makes you more comfortable. I couldn't put you out of your home, Katherine protested. It's no hardship, not if it means seeing you at breakfast. Their courtship progressed with the same straightforward honesty that had marked their first meeting. Lucas took her riding across his land, showing her hidden valleys and spring-fed streams. They visited neighbors, went to Sunday services together in Silver Creek, where the innkeeper's wife gave Katherine apologetic smiles, and talked long into the evenings about books, dreams, and the pasts that had shaped them. 2 weeks after her arrival, Lucas kissed her for the first time. They were returning from a ride to a hilltop overlooking the property, the sunset painting the landscape in gold and crimson. He helped her down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist. Katherine, he said, her name almost a question. She looked up at him, at the face that had become dear to her with its weathered lines and kind eyes. Yes, she answered, though he hadn't spoken the question aloud. His lips met hers with gentle certainty, a promise rather than a demand. Katherine had been kissed before briefly properly by a young man her father had approved of in Philadelphia, but this was different. This was a meeting of equals, a beginning rather than a stolen moment. When they parted, Lucas kept her close. I'm falling in love with you, he said simply. I thought you should know. Katherine smiled, a happiness welling up inside her that she hadn't felt since before her parents' deaths. I think I'm falling in love with you too. As summer progressed, Katherine settled into life in the small community. She helped organize books for the school, met her future students and their parents, and became a familiar face at Lucas's side at local gatherings. The gossip Mrs. Bennet had warned about faded as people accepted her presence. In July, Lucas took her to Carson City to select supplies for the school year. While there, he stopped at a jeweler's shop and asked her to wait outside for a moment. When he emerged, he didn't show her what he'd purchased, but his eyes held a secret that made her heart beat faster. That evening, back at the ranch, he asked her to join him for a walk. The air was cooling after a hot day, and the scent of sage filled the breeze. He led her to a spot near a gnarled juniper tree where the view stretched endlessly. I've been thinking, Lucas said, taking her hands in his. About the future. Have you? Katherine's voice came out steadier than she felt. 2 months ago, you stepped off a stagecoach and my world changed. He squeezed her hands gently. I know it hasn't been long, but I've lived enough to recognize what matters when I find it. Katherine's eyes filled with tears as Lucas knelt before her, producing a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold ring with a single pearl. It's not fancy, he said apologetically, but it was my mother's. She'd have liked you, Katherine. It's beautiful, she whispered. Katherine Ellis, I'm asking if you'd do me the honor of becoming my wife. If you'd make this house a home, help me build something lasting here. I'm asking if you'd let me love you for the rest of our days. Looking down at this man who had offered his home to a stranger, who had shown her kindness without expectation, who had opened not just his door but his heart, Katherine knew there was only one answer. Yes, she said, joy making her voice tremble. Yes, Lucas. They were married in August, a small ceremony in the Silver Creek Church with neighbors and new friends in attendance. Mrs. Whittaker baked the cake, and even the innkeeper offered grudging congratulations. September brought Catherine's first day of teaching at the Red Rock School, 20 eager faces looking up at her as she wrote her new name on the blackboard. Mrs. Katherine Harrington. Each evening, she returned to the ranch to home where Lucas waited. Sometimes with flowers gathered from the hillsides, sometimes with a book he thought she'd enjoy, always with a kiss and the question, "How was your day, Mrs. Harrington?" As autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, Katherine often thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this life. If the innkeeper hadn't turned her away, if Lucas hadn't ridden into town that evening, if she'd continued on to San Francisco as planned, how different everything would have been. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Lucas's arm around her shoulders, she voiced this thought. "Do you ever wonder about coincidence?" she asked. "If things had happened differently that night, we never would have met." Lucas considered this, his fingers absently stroking her arm. "My mother used to say that life has a way of putting us where we need to be, even when we think we're lost." He kissed the top of her head. "I'm just grateful you were denied that room at the inn." Katherine leaned into him, thinking of the journey that had brought her here, the losses, the fears, the moments of despair that had ultimately led to this contentment she'd never imagined possible. "So am I," she whispered, watching the firelight dance across the walls of the home that was now truly hers. Outside, the wind whispered through the sage, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate under the vast, star-filled sky.